The day I turned 18 wasn't a celebration. It was an erasure. For 2 years since the accident that took my parents, I had been a ward of the state, a file in a cabinet, a name on a list. And on that cold March morning, the state decided it was done with me. I was handed a black garbage bag containing 2 pairs of jeans, a few shirts, a worn copy of a book I no longer remembered reading, and a thin envelope with $200 in cash. "Good luck, Leo," Mrs. Gable, the facility director, had said, her voice devoid of any actual luck. She didn't look at me. She looked at the clock on the wall behind my head. Time was up. My time. Her time. All of it. Standing on the cracked concrete steps of the Northwood Children's Home, with the metal door clicking shut behind me, the world felt impossibly large and terrifyingly silent. The air was thin and sharp, carrying the smell of wet pavement and distant exhaust fumes. I had nowhere to go, no family to call, no couch to crash on, just a bus station 2 miles down the road and a future as blank and gray as the morning sky. This is the story of how a single envelope, handed to me in a sterile office, led me to 500 acres of forgotten land, a secret buried under the floorboards of a dusty old barn, and a truth that would force me to decide who I was really meant to be. If you've ever felt lost, like a ghost in your own life, then stick around. This story is for you. And if it resonates, maybe hit that subscribe button, because we're building a community here for people who know what it's like to start over from nothing. My last official act as a ward of the state was a meeting with a social worker named Ms. Albright. Her office was a beige box that smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. She had a kind but weary face, the kind you get from seeing too many stories like mine play out. She ran through the checklist of resources: shelters, job placement programs, counseling services I couldn't afford. I nodded, my mind a million miles away, trying to calculate how long $200 would last. A week? Maybe 2 if I only ate once a day. Then, as I was about to stand up and walk out into that terrifying blankness, she slid a thick, cream-colored envelope across the desk. It felt heavy, important. My name, Leo Vance, was written on the front in elegant, looping cursive. "This came for you," she said, "from a law firm. It was sent here with instructions to be given to you on your 18th birthday. We don't know what it's about." I stared at it. A lawyer? The only lawyers I knew were the ones who had processed the paperwork after my parents died, faceless names on official documents. I turned the envelope over. The return address was for a firm called Abernathy and Sons, located in a town I'd never heard of, Oakhaven. I didn't know anyone in a place called Oakhaven. I didn't really know anyone, period. My parents had been quiet people, their world small and self-contained. Their only living relative was my mother's sister Clara, a woman I'd met only a handful of times as a small child. She was a ghost in my memory, a faint impression of wild, dark hair and a laugh that sounded like wind chimes. She sent a card for my birthday once or twice, then nothing. My parents said she was a wanderer, someone who couldn't be tied down. After the accident, I was told she couldn't be located. I assumed she just didn't want to be found, especially not by a nephew who was now an orphan. I tore the envelope open right there in that beige office, my fingers clumsy and shaking. Inside was a single stiff sheet of paper. It was a letter, but not a personal one. It was formal, full of legal words I barely understood. It requested my presence at the offices of Abernathy and Sons for the reading of the last will and testament of one Clara May Vance, my aunt. The letter stated that I was the sole beneficiary. Beneficiary of what? A box of old books, a broken-down car, it didn't matter. The most stunning part was the date printed at the top. She had passed away 6 months ago. No one had told me. I had been living just 30 miles away, counting down the days to my release, and my only living relative had died, and the world hadn't even bothered to whisper the news. A cold, heavy feeling settled in my stomach. Grief, but a strange, hollow kind of grief for someone I barely knew, mixed with a bitter anger at the system that had held me in its sterile grasp, so disconnected from the real world that a death in my own family was just another piece of misplaced paperwork. Ms. Albright saw the look on my face. "What is it?" she asked, her professional weariness momentarily replaced by genuine concern. "My aunt," I said, my voice hoarse. "She's gone. This says she left me something." The bus ticket to Oak Haven cost $22. As the city skyline shrank in the grimy rear window of the bus, I felt a strange sense of detachment. I was leaving the only world I had known for the past 2 years, but it didn't feel like a liberation. It felt like being cast adrift. The bus rumbled through sprawling suburbs, then into rolling countryside. The gray concrete gave way to green fields and patches of dense forest. I watched the landscape blur past, my reflection a pale, ghostly image superimposed over the passing trees. Oak Haven wasn't so much a town as a crossroads with a few buildings clustered around it, a gas station, a diner, a post office, and a single block of brick storefronts. The law office of Abernathy and Sons was on the second floor of the oldest-looking building above a hardware store. The stairs creaked under my weight, each step echoing in the quiet hallway. Mr. Abernathy was an old man, probably in his 70s, with kind eyes magnified by thick glasses and a suit that looked older than I was. His office was filled with books, towering stacks of them on shelves on the floor on his desk. They smelled of dust and leather and time. He shook my hand, his grip surprisingly firm. "Leo," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. "I'm glad you could make it. I was your aunt's attorney for many years. She was a remarkable woman." He gestured for me to sit. The leather chair sighed as I sank into it. He didn't waste time. He opened a folder on his desk and began to read in a calm, steady voice. The legal language was dense, but the core of it was shockingly simple. Clara May Vance, having no other living relatives, left her entire estate to her nephew, Leo Vance, and that estate consisted of one thing: a parcel of land. 512 acres, to be precise, Mr. Abernathy concluded, looking at me over the top of his glasses, along with the farmhouse, the barn, and all their contents. I couldn't breathe. 500 acres. The words didn't make sense. I had grown up in a small suburban house with a backyard the size of a postage stamp, and for the last 2 years, my entire world had been a single room I shared with another boy. What was a person supposed to do with 500 acres? It was a number so vast it was abstract, like a star or a grain of sand. "There are, of course, property taxes," he continued gently. "They're significant, but Clara made arrangements. She established a trust to cover them for the next 5 years, to give you time to, well, to figure things out." He slid a large manila envelope across the desk. Inside was the deed, a thick stack of legal documents, and a heavy, old-fashioned iron key attached to a simple brass tag that read, "Home." "She also left you this," he said, handing me a smaller, sealed envelope. This one was different from the lawyer's. It was the same cream-colored paper, but my name was written in the same cursive as before, the ink slightly faded. It was from her. A local man who ran a small taxi service, a rusty sedan that smelled of cigarette smoke and pine air freshener, drove me out to the property. His name was George, and he talked the whole way, pointing out landmarks and telling me stories about the town. "Clara's place?" he'd said when I told him the address. "Haven't been out that way in years. She was a private one, your aunt. Kept to herself. But she was tough. Real tough." The paved road turned to gravel, then to a dirt track that was more potholes than road. The car bounced and shuddered, kicking up a cloud of dust. We drove for another 10 minutes deeper into the woods, until the trees finally opened up into a wide, overgrown meadow. And there it was. The house was a simple 2-story farmhouse, its white paint peeling to show the gray wood beneath. A wide porch sagged in the middle, and several windows were boarded up. It looked tired, beaten down by years of weather and neglect. To its right, set back a little farther from the road, stood the barn. It was huge, a classic gambrel-roofed giant, its red paint faded to a dull, rusty brown. The whole place was surrounded by a sea of tall, wild grass, dotted with wildflowers and thorny bushes. It didn't look like an inheritance. It looked like a ruin. George dropped me at the end of the long driveway. "You need anything, you call the diner. They'll know how to find me," he said, before turning his car around and disappearing back down the dirt track, leaving me alone in a profound and unsettling silence. For a long time, I just stood there, the heavy key digging into my palm, the garbage bag with my life's possessions at my feet. The only sounds were the wind rustling through the tall grass and the distant caw of a crow. This was mine. This huge, broken, beautiful, terrifying place was mine. I felt a surge of something I couldn't name. Not happiness, not yet. It was closer to awe, mixed with a deep, paralyzing fear. I was the king of a forgotten kingdom, and I didn't even know how to open the castle gate. I walked up the overgrown path to the house, my sneakers sinking into the soft earth. The air smelled of damp soil, pine needles, and something else, something sweet and wild like clover. The iron key was cold and heavy in my hand. It slid into the lock on the front door with a gritty scrape. I turned it, and with a loud, protesting groan, the lock clicked open. I pushed the door inward. A wave of stale, musty air washed over me. The inside of the house was dark, the windows covered in a thick film of dust, the furniture draped in white sheets like a congregation of silent ghosts. Sunlight struggled through the grime, illuminating swirling dust motes in the air. It was a time capsule. A life paused mid-sentence. I could see the outlines of a sofa, chairs, a dining table. I walked through the downstairs rooms, my footsteps echoing on the wooden floors. In the kitchen, a calendar on the wall was still turned to August of the previous year, a picture of a soaring eagle above the grid of days. The day she died, I thought. I touched the edge of the calendar, a sudden sharp pang of that hollow grief hitting me again. Who was this woman? This ghost who had left me a kingdom of dust and silence. I felt like an intruder, a trespasser in someone else's memories. The house felt too personal, too heavy with a life I hadn't known. I backed out, closing the door gently behind me, and turned my attention to the barn. The barn felt different. It wasn't a home. It was a place of work, of function. It felt more honest, somehow. Its massive sliding door was slightly ajar. I put my shoulder to it and shoved. With a deep, groaning rumble of wood on rusted metal, it slid open just enough for me to slip inside. The interior was cavernous. Huge hand-hewn beams crisscrossed high overhead, disappearing into the shadows of the hayloft. Sunlight streamed through gaps in the siding, creating brilliant, shifting stripes of light across the dusty floor. The air was thick with the smell of old hay, dry earth, and motor oil. It was mostly empty. A few pieces of old, rust-covered farm equipment sat in one corner like sleeping iron. Dinosaurs. Stacks of rotting lumber leaned against a wall. A long, sturdy workbench stood under a grimy window, covered in cobwebs and a scattering of forgotten tools. I walked to the center of the vast, open space and just stood there, letting my eyes adjust to the dim light. This was a place of purpose. You could feel it in the bones of the structure. It had been built to last, to shelter, to protect. And in that moment, standing in the cathedral of dust and light, I felt a flicker of something new. Not fear, but a sense of possibility. This was real. This was solid. I ran my hand along one of the massive support beams. The wood was rough and splintered, but it was strong. I felt a connection to it, to the history of this place. I started walking the perimeter, my boots kicking up little puffs of dust with each step. I was just exploring with no real goal in mind when my foot caught on something. I stumbled, catching myself on a wooden stall. Looking down, I saw that one of the floorboards was raised slightly higher than the others. It wasn't broken. It looked like it had been pried up and not set back properly. Curiosity, a feeling I hadn't had much use for in years, sparked inside me. I knelt down, the rough wood digging into my knees. I worked my fingers into the gap and pulled. The board was heavy, but it came up easily. Beneath it was not dirt, but a dark, hollow space. And nestled inside that space, wrapped in a thick, greasy piece of oilcloth, was a metal box. It was an old, military-style ammunition can, painted olive drab, with a heavy latch on the front. My heart started to pound, a fast, heavy rhythm against my ribs. This was not an accident. This was hidden. This was a secret. With trembling hands, I lifted the box from its hiding place. It was heavy, heavier than it should have been for its size. I set it on the dusty floor and wiped my sweaty palms on my jeans. The latch was stiff with rust, but after a moment of struggling, it sprang open with a loud click. I lifted the lid. My breath caught in my throat. The box was filled with money, stacks of it bundled together with rubber bands, 50s and hundreds. It wasn't a king's ransom, but it was more money than I had ever seen in my entire life. I reached in and touched the top bundle. The paper was crisp, real. I felt dizzy, lightheaded. My first thought was that she was a criminal, some kind of drug runner or bank robber. Why else would you hide this much cash under a barn floor? But then I saw it, tucked in alongside the stacks of money, a thick, cream-colored envelope just like the one Mr. Abernathy had given me. My name was on it, written in that same familiar cursive. This was for me, all of it. I set the money aside, my mind unable to process its reality, and picked up the letter. The paper was thick and soft, the envelope unsealed. Inside were several pages, filled front and back with that same elegant, slightly slanted handwriting. I leaned back against a wooden post, the shafts of light cutting through the gloom, and began to read. "My dearest Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, then it means I am gone, and the world has finally delivered you to this place. I am so sorry. I am sorry for not being there, for not taking you in after your parents passed. I know you must think I abandoned you. I know you must hate me. Please believe me when I say it was the hardest thing I have ever had to do." The words blurred for a moment. I blinked back the sudden sting in my eyes and kept reading. "There are things you don't know, Leo. Things about our family, about this land. Your mother and I, we were very different. She wanted a quiet life, a safe life. I wanted a life that mattered, and I made enemies, powerful ones. When she and your father died, those enemies saw an opportunity. They thought they could use you to get to me, to get to this land. The safest place for you was the one place they would never look. Inside the system. Anonymous. Invisible. It broke my heart to leave you there, to know you were alone. I watched from a distance through people I trusted. I made sure you were safe, but I couldn't come near you. It would have put you in danger." My whole body went cold. This wasn't the story I had told myself. The story of the uncaring, selfish aunt who couldn't be bothered. This was something else entirely. This was a story of protection, of sacrifice. "The money in this box is for you," she continued. "It's enough to get you started, to buy a truck, to fix the house, to live on for a while. Use it. It's clean money, saved over years from my work. But Leo, the money is not the real inheritance. The land is. This place is special. It's more than just dirt and trees. It's alive. It's a sanctuary, and it is in danger. I paused, my mind reeling. Enemies? Danger? It sounded like something out of a movie, not my life. I read on. The people who wanted it before still want it now. They will come for you. They will offer you a fortune for this place. They will tell you it's a worthless piece of overgrown wilderness. They will lie. Do not believe them. The choice will be yours. You can sell, take the money, and disappear. I wouldn't blame you if you did. You deserve an easy life after everything you've been through, but I hope you don't. I hope you see what I see. I hope you feel what I feel when you stand on that hill at sunset. The letter went on for several more pages, describing the land, the creek that ran through the northern edge, the ancient oak tree on the western ridge. She wrote about the seasons, the way the light changed, the sounds of the birds in the morning. It wasn't just a description, it was a love letter to a place. And at the end, she wrote one last cryptic paragraph. Everything you need to understand is here, on this land. I had to hide my research, my work. When the time comes and you need to know the whole truth, look for where the shadow of the old world meets the light of the new. That is all I can say. Be safe, Leo. Know that I loved you, always. I finished the letter and sat there in the dusty silence of the barn, the pages trembling in my hand. The world had tilted on its axis. My aunt wasn't a villain, she was a guardian. And she hadn't just left me a piece of property. She had left me a legacy, a mystery, and a fight. I carefully folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. I looked at the stacks of cash, no longer seeing them as criminal evidence, but as a gift, a tool, a chance. I didn't know who these enemies were or what they wanted with this specific patch of earth, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to run. This place, this broken-down farm in the middle of nowhere, was the first thing in my entire life that felt truly mine. And I was going to stay. The next few weeks were a blur of hard work and discovery. I took a few $1,000s from the box and walked the 5 miles into Oak Haven. I opened a bank account, which felt like a monumental step into adulthood. Then I went to the hardware store below Mr. Abernathy's office and bought the basics: a generator, work gloves, cleaning supplies, a heavy-duty flashlight, and a new lock for the front door. The owner, a gruff but helpful man named Mr. Henderson, helped me load everything into the back of a used pickup truck I bought from a farmer on the edge of town. It was a 20-year-old Ford, dented and rusted, but the engine turned over with a reassuring roar. Driving it back to the farm, I felt a sense of freedom I had never known. The first priority was making the house livable. I pulled the dusty sheets off the furniture, revealing simple, sturdy wooden pieces that were worn but well cared for. I spent days scrubbing floors, washing windows, and battling cobwebs. I got the water running from the well pump and fired up the old propane heater. Slowly, painstakingly, the house started to feel less like a tomb and more like a home. Each night, exhausted and covered in grime, I would sit on the sagging porch and watch the sunset paint the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple. The silence was no longer terrifying. It was peaceful. I started to understand what Clara meant. There was a magic to this place, a deep, ancient rhythm that seeped into your bones. I explored the land, walking for hours every day. I found the creek she mentioned, a ribbon of clear, cold water tumbling over smooth stones. I found the ancient oak on the ridge, its massive branches spreading like a cathedral ceiling over the forest floor. I saw deer in the meadows at dawn and heard the hoot of an owl at night. This wasn't just empty space. It was a living, breathing world. Exactly 1 month after my arrival, the threat she had warned me about materialized. It didn't come in a black car with menacing figures. It came in a crisp white envelope delivered by a courier. The logo on the letterhead was a sleek green V, Viridian Holdings. The letter was polite, professional, and utterly chilling. It congratulated me on my inheritance and then made me an offer. They wanted to purchase the entire 512-acre property. The number they offered made me sit down, my legs suddenly weak. It was millions, more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. The letter went on to explain that they were a sustainable development company, planning a state-of-the-art community that would be a model of environmental responsibility. They spoke of creating jobs and boosting the local economy. It all sounded so reasonable, so benevolent. But at the bottom of the second page was a sentence that made my blood run cold. We had previously been in negotiations with Ms. Vance regarding this acquisition and are hopeful that you will see the immense benefit of our renewed proposal. They had come for her first. This was them. This was the enemy. My first instinct was to call Mr. Abernathy. I drove into town and used the payphone outside the diner. I read him the letter. He was silent for a long moment. "Leo," he said finally, his voice grave, "do not respond to this. Do not call them. Do not engage with them in any way. Viridian is not some small-time developer. They are a massive corporation with a very aggressive legal team. They are known for buying up large tracts of rural land. Some say their methods aren't always clean." "What do I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "For now, nothing. Let me do some digging. In the meantime, be careful. Let me know if anyone comes out to the property." I hung up the phone, feeling a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. Clara's words echoed in my mind. They will lie. This pristine, eco-friendly community was the lie. But what was the truth? What was so special about this land that a corporation would offer a fortune for it? The answer had to be in her research, the work she had hidden. I had to find it. I read her letter again and again, focusing on that final cryptic clue. Look for where the shadow of the old world meets the light of the new. What did it mean? The old world and the new. I thought about the farm, the old farmhouse, the ancient barn, the new generator I'd bought, the new life I was trying to build. It felt too abstract. For days, I searched. I combed through the house, tapping on walls, looking for hidden compartments. I searched the cellar, the attic, every dusty corner. Nothing. I kept coming back to the barn. It felt like the heart of the property, the place where she had hidden the first secret. The clue had to be here. Listen, if you've made it this far into my story, you're not just a passive listener, you're invested. And I want to take a second to acknowledge that. Because life throws these impossible choices at us, doesn't it? Moments where you have to decide between the easy path and the right one. Maybe you've faced a choice like that in your own life, a job, a relationship, a moral line in the sand. If this is hitting you, if you know what it feels like to stand at a crossroads with the weight of the world on your shoulders, let me know in the comments. You don't have to share the details, just a word to let me know you get it. Because the truth is, we all feel alone in those moments. But we're not. We're all part of this bigger human story of struggle and strength. And hearing from you, knowing you're out there, it helps. It really does. Now, let's get back to that barn and the secret it was still hiding. I spent the next week obsessed with the riddle. Where the shadow of the old world meets the light of the new. I sat on the workbench in the barn, staring at the interplay of light and shadow, trying to think like she would. The old world. What was older than the barn itself? The hand-hewn beams, the foundation stones, the new light, the sun, the generator. It wasn't literal, it had to be a metaphor. I thought about her work. Mr. Abernathy had said she was a private person. George, the taxi driver, had called her tough. The letter revealed she was a protector. She was fighting something. What tools would she use? On the third day of my obsessive search, I was sitting on the workbench as the sun began to set. The long golden rays of late afternoon light were streaming through the grimy west-facing window, illuminating the far wall of the barn. And that's when I saw it. The new light wasn't from a lamp. It was from a laptop. On the workbench, buried under a pile of old canvases, was a very old, very heavy laptop computer from the early 2000s. It was an ancient, brick-like thing. That was the new world in her time. And the old world? The workbench itself. It was a massive, heavy piece of furniture, built from timbers as old as the barn. I ran my hands over its surface, feeling the nicks and scars of 100 years of work. The shadow of the old world. The shadow. I looked at the floor beneath the workbench. It was dark, cast in the deep shadow of the heavy table. I got down on my hands and knees, my heart starting to race again. I ran my flashlight beam over the floorboards. They were dark with oil stains and dirt. But as I scanned the area, I saw something. A perfect, almost invisible seam in the shape of a square about 2 feet by 2 feet. It wasn't a loose board like before. This was a deliberate, carefully cut trapdoor, designed to be hidden in the grime and shadow. It took me another hour to figure out how to open it. There was no handle, no latch. Finally, in desperation, I started tapping on the boards around it. Near one corner, I heard a hollow sound. I pushed down hard, and with a soft click, a small section of the wood depressed like a button. The trapdoor popped up by half an inch. I pried it open with a crowbar. Inside was another secret compartment, this one lined with tin. And inside the compartment was another metal box, larger than the first. This one wasn't an ammo can. It was a fireproof safe box. It wasn't locked with a key, but with a combination dial. My heart sank. A combination. It could be anything. I sat back on my heels, defeated. How was I supposed to guess the combination? I thought back to the letter, to every word she wrote. Her love for the land, the creek, the oak tree, the dates. Her birthday, my birthday, the date my parents died. I tried them all. Nothing. I spent the rest of the evening trying every number I could think of, my frustration growing with each failed attempt. Exhausted, I finally gave up and went back to the house. I made myself dinner, but I couldn't eat. My mind was stuck on that box, on the secrets it held. I picked up her letter again, reading it for what felt like the 100th time. And then I saw it. It had been staring me in the face the whole time. In the paragraph about the land, she wrote, "This place is special. 512 acres of sanctuary." It wasn't just a number. 512. It was a code. I grabbed my flashlight and ran back to the barn, my heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. I knelt in front of the box, my fingers trembling as I turned the dial. Right to 5, left past 5 to 1, right to 2. I pulled the handle. It clicked open. Inside the box there was no money. There was something far more valuable. It was filled with journals, binders of legal documents, water sample test results from a lab, photographs, and maps. This was it. This was her research, her life's work. I carried the box back to the house and spread the contents out on the kitchen table under the bare bulb of a single lamp. I started with the journals. There were 3 of them, thick, leather-bound books, filled with her neat, precise handwriting. I opened the first one. The entries began 10 years ago. For hours I read. I read about her life, her studies as a biologist, her growing passion for environmental justice, and I read about her fight. Clara, it turned out, was not just a recluse. She was a brilliant and dedicated citizen scientist. For years, she had been meticulously documenting the ecology of her land, which she had discovered was not just a simple forest, but a critical watershed that fed into the region's main river. The land acted as a natural filter, and its unique ecosystem was home to several rare and endangered species of plants and insects, things so small and unassuming that no one else had ever bothered to look for them. Then, about 5 years ago, the entries in her journal began to change. They grew more urgent, more worried. Viridian Holdings had purchased 1,000 acres of old industrial land bordering her property to the north. They announced their plans for a luxury housing development, complete with a golf course. They promised it would be green. But Clara knew better. She started taking soil and water samples from the creek that flowed from their property onto hers. The lab results, which I found in one of the binders, were horrifying. The water was contaminated with heavy metals, industrial solvents, and carcinogenic chemicals. Remnants of the old factory that had been on their land. Things they were legally required to clean up before building anything. They weren't cleaning it up. They were letting it leach into the groundwater, poisoning the watershed, and they were trying to cover it up. The photographs were devastating. Pictures of sick-looking trees, of strangely colored algae blooming in the creek, of dead frogs washed up on the banks. She had documented it all. The legal documents were copies of letters she had sent to the Environmental Protection Agency, to the state's environmental department, to local officials. Her concerns were dismissed at every turn. Viridian's lawyers were always one step ahead, burying her in paperwork, questioning her credentials, claiming her data was unscientific. They were stonewalling her, waiting her out, but she hadn't given up. The last binder contained the beginnings of a massive lawsuit she was preparing to file against them herself. She had spent years gathering irrefutable proof of their criminal negligence. She had maps showing the plume of contamination spreading from their property directly towards the town's aquifer. They weren't just destroying a forest. They were poisoning a community, and they knew it. The final journal entry was dated 2 days before her car accident. "They know I have it all," she wrote. Their lawyers called Abernathy today with a final offer, 10 times what the land is worth. It wasn't a negotiation, it was a threat. They know I won't sell. I think they're getting desperate. I have to get this evidence to someone I can trust. I have to protect the work. I have to protect Leo. Her accident hadn't been an accident. I sat there at the kitchen table, the sun beginning to rise, surrounded by the evidence of my aunt's courage and her sacrifice. The grief I felt was no longer hollow. It was a raw, aching wound. She hadn't just died, she had been silenced. And the inheritance she had left me wasn't 500 acres of land. It was a weapon. It was the truth. The offer from Viridian wasn't a business proposal. It was hush money. They weren't trying to buy the land. They were trying to buy my silence. They were trying to bury her work and the truth forever. A wave of fury, cold and pure, washed through me. The fear I had felt for weeks was burned away by it. I thought of my 2 years in the system, feeling invisible, powerless. I thought of my aunt, fighting this battle all alone in the quiet of these woods. They had underestimated her. And now they were underestimating me. They saw an 18-year-old kid, an orphan with nothing to his name. They saw an easy target. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The next morning, I carefully packed all of the evidence, the journals, the lab results, the photos, the maps, back into the fireproof box. I loaded it into my truck and drove to Oakhaven. I didn't go to the bank. I didn't go to the diner. I walked up the creaking stairs to Mr. Abernathy's office. He looked up from his desk as I entered, his expression weary. "Leo," he said, "I've been doing some research on Viridian. It's not good. They have a history of this. They find loopholes, they bury their opposition in legal fees. They always win." "Not this time," I said. I lifted the heavy box and set it on his desk with a solid thud. My aunt didn't just leave me the land. She left me this. I opened the box. I watched his eyes widen as he looked at the contents. He picked up one of the journals, his hands gentle, almost reverent. He flipped through the pages, then looked at the lab results, his brow furrowed in concentration. For almost an hour, he sat there in silence, absorbing the story of Clara's fight. When he finally looked up at me, his kind eyes were shining with a new light. It was a look of profound respect. "My God," he whispered, "she did it. She actually got the proof." He looked at me, his gaze steady and serious. "Leo, you understand what this means, don't you? You have two choices. You can take this box, walk away, and no one would ever know. Or you can use it. You can finish the fight she started. But I have to warn you, it will not be easy. Viridian will come after you with everything they have. They will try to discredit you, to bankrupt you, to scare you." I met his gaze without flinching. The scared, lost boy who had walked into this office a month ago was gone. In his place was someone else, someone forged in the quiet of that barn and the fire of his aunt's legacy. "They offered me millions of dollars to be quiet and walk away," I said, my voice steady. "They think that's what I want. They think because I came from nothing, money is all I care about." I leaned forward, my hands flat on his desk. "This place, this land, it's the only home I have. My aunt died protecting it. I'm not selling, I'm fighting." A slow smile spread across Mr. Abernathy's face. It transformed his weary features, making him look younger, stronger. "I was hoping you'd say that," he said. "Clara always said you had your mother's heart, but her spirit. She knew you'd make the right choice." He stood up and walked over to his bookshelf, pulling down a thick legal volume. "I'm just a small-town lawyer, Leo. This is bigger than me, but I know who to call." That phone call changed everything. Mr. Abernathy connected me with a non-profit environmental law firm based in the state capital. They were a small, scrappy team of lawyers who specialized in taking on corporate polluters. They were, in his words, giant killers. The next day, two lawyers from the firm, a sharp, energetic woman named Sarah and a quiet, methodical man named Ben, drove out to the farm. I sat with them at the kitchen table, the same table where I had uncovered the truth, and I told them everything. I showed them the box, walked them through Clara's research. They listened intently, their faces growing more and more serious as the hours passed. They spent the entire day on the property. Ben took new water and soil samples, meticulously documenting everything. Sarah walked the land with me, asking questions about Clara, about my life, about what I wanted. She didn't treat me like a kid. She treated me like a client, a partner. "Your aunt built an ironclad case, Leo," she said, as they were preparing to leave that evening. "This evidence is a smoking gun. With this, we can not only stop their development, but we can probably get the EPA to reopen their investigation and hold them accountable for the cleanup. It's the fight of a lifetime." "Can we win?" I asked. "It's going to be a long, ugly battle," she said honestly. "They'll file motion after motion to try and bleed us dry. They'll try to paint you as an unreliable, disgruntled kid looking for a payday. But yes," she said, a fierce, determined look in her eye, "I think we can win." The lawsuit was filed a week later. The story hit the local news, then the state papers. "Orphan inherits land, uncovers major corporate contamination." Viridian Holdings immediately issued a statement calling the lawsuit baseless and defamatory, a desperate attempt to extort money from them. Their lawyers sent me a cease and desist letter. Then came the new offer, delivered by a courier. It was triple the first one. A check, already made out to me, was attached. All I had to do was sign the settlement papers. I tore the check in half and mailed it back to them. The battle lines were drawn. The next few months were the hardest of my life. The legal proceedings were slow and draining. Viridian's lawyers did exactly what Sarah predicted. They buried us in paperwork. They filed motions to have Clara's evidence thrown out. They tried to subpoena my records from the children's home, trying to find anything they could use to paint me as unstable. But I wasn't alone anymore. Mr. Abernathy was my rock, a constant source of calm advice. Sarah and Ben were relentless, fighting back at every turn. And something else started to happen. The community, which had at first been wary of the outsider who had inherited the old Vance place, began to take notice. People in Oakhaven started talking. George, the taxi driver, stopped me at the diner one day. "I read about what you're doing," he said, shaking my hand. "Your aunt would be proud. We all knew something wasn't right with that Viridian company." Mr. Henderson from the hardware store gave me a discount on supplies to fix up the barn. A few local farmers whose land was downstream from the contamination joined the lawsuit as co-plaintiffs. I was no longer just fighting for my aunt's legacy. I was fighting for a community. I spent my days working on the farm. I cleared overgrown fields, repaired fences, and started a small vegetable garden. I learned the names of the trees and the birds. The land was healing me as much as I was healing it. It was hard physical work, but it grounded me, kept me sane amidst the chaos of the legal battle. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of depositions, I climbed the ridge to the ancient oak tree. I sat with my back against its massive trunk and watched the sun go down. I thought about the boy who had arrived here with nothing but a garbage bag and a heart full of fear. He was gone. In his place was a young man who had a home, a purpose, and a fight worth fighting. I hadn't received an inheritance of land and money. I had received an inheritance of character. Clara had given me more than a deed. She had given me a choice. The choice to stand for something. The choice to finish what she started. The legal battle is still ongoing. It will be for a long time. There are no guarantees. But for the first time in my life, I know who I am. I am not just Leo Vance, the orphan. I am the guardian of this land. I am my aunt's nephew, and I am not for sale. This journey has taught me that inheritance isn't about what you're given. It's about what you choose to do with it. We all inherit something, a story, a struggle, a piece of land, a set of values. Sometimes the most valuable inheritance is the one that asks the most of us. It's the one that forces us to grow, to fight, to become more than we ever thought we could be. Home isn't just a roof over your head. It's a place that claims you, a place that gives you a reason to stand your ground. It's the piece of the world you are willing to fight for. For me, it's 512 acres of wild, beautiful, and endangered land in the middle of nowhere. It's the legacy of a woman I barely knew, but have come to love with all my heart. What about you? What's the inheritance that has shaped your life? It might not be land or money. Maybe it's a lesson from a grandparent, a passion passed down from a parent, or the strength you found after a painful loss. I want you to think about that, and I want you to share it. This channel is more than just a place for stories. It's a place for us to connect over the things that truly matter. If my story has moved you, please consider subscribing and becoming a part of this community. Click the bell so you don't miss what comes next. And in the comments below, tell me, what is the one thing you would fight for? Your story matters. Your fight matters. Thank you for listening.